Commander Vorthak's tentacles twitched with barely contained amusement as he watched the new batch of cadets file into the Galactic Military Academy's orientation hall. His 6 eyes scanned the crowd of young beings from across the galaxy, each species represented in their colorful diversity. Tall, scaled reptans stood next to insectoid Hivari, while the crystalline Zethari hummed softly in harmonious frequencies. And then there was her, the human. Standing barely 5.5 feet tall, with unremarkable brown hair tied back in what humans called a ponytail, Cadet Maya Torres looked about as threatening as a Glibian flower petal, which, for the record, was used primarily for making tea. "Oh, wonderful," Vorthak muttered under his breath, his translator device picking up the sarcasm perfectly. "Another human who thinks she can play soldier." His aide, Lieutenant Crox, leaned closer with his 4 arms folded. "Sir, the human female scored exceptionally high on the entrance exams." "Of course she did." Vorthak's eye stalks swiveled to examine Torres more closely. "They always score well on paper. It's the actual combat that separates the warriors from the— what do humans call them? The keyboard heroes." The orientation began with the traditional address about honor, duty, and the sacred responsibility of protecting the Galactic Alliance. Vorthak had given this speech roughly 4,000 times, and he could probably recite it in his sleep. Today, however, he decided to add a little extra spice. "Cadets," his voice boomed across the amphitheater. "You represent 17 different species, each bringing your own strengths to this academy. The Reptans bring their natural armor and strength. The Hivari contribute their hive-mind tactical coordination. Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 94.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel, and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. The Zethari offer their energy manipulation abilities." He paused, letting his gaze fall directly on Maya Torres. "And the humans. Well, they bring." Another pause, longer this time. "Enthusiasm." A few chuckles rippled through the crowd. Maya's expression didn't change one bit. She just stood there, hands clasped behind her back, looking straight ahead with those peculiar human eyes that seemed to hold far too much intelligence for someone so young. "Sir," whispered Lieutenant Crox, "perhaps we shouldn't antagonize the human on the first day." "Antagonize?" Vorthak's tentacles curled in what passed for a grin among his species. "Lieutenant, I'm simply managing expectations. Humans have this delightful habit of overestimating their abilities. Better she learns now than during her first combat simulation." The weeks that followed were educational. The first combat simulation was a standard urban warfare scenario. Teams of 5 cadets each were assigned to secure a mock city district while defending against automated hostile forces. Simple enough for first-year students. Maya Torres was assigned to Team 7, along with 2 Reptans, a Hivari drone, and a Zethari energy manipulator. Not exactly the dream team, considering the Reptans, Brack, and Sven had already made it clear they considered humans to be squishy annoyances, while the Hivari, designated Unit 445, communicated only through chemical signals that most species couldn't even detect. The Zethari, at least, seemed friendly enough. Halo had introduced herself with a pleasant harmonic frequency that the translator rendered as something like musical laughter. "All right, Team 7, announced Drill Sergeant Grom, a mountain of muscle and scars from the warrior species known as the Thrakari. "Your objective is simple. Secure the central plaza, hold it for 30 minutes against automated resistance, then extract to the designated zone. You have 1 hour total. Begin. Vorthak settled back in the observation deck, a steaming cup of Vrelian coffee in one tentacle, while his other manipulators operated the monitoring equipment. Around him, other instructors watched their screens with varying degrees of interest. "I give the humans team 15 minutes before they're eliminated," commented Professor Yilnex, the Academy's tactical warfare specialist. "You're being generous," replied Major Strex. 10 minutes, maximum." What happened next would later be referred to in Academy records as the Torres incident. The simulation began with Team 7 materializing at the edge of the urban combat zone. Standard protocol dictated that teams should proceed cautiously, using the larger, stronger species as frontline fighters, while support members provided covering fire and tactical assistance. Maya Torres had apparently never read the standard protocol manual. "Brak, Sven, I need you to create a distraction at the main entrance," she said calmly, pulling up a holographic display of the area. "Big, loud, obvious. Draw as much attention as possible." "Human!" Brak growled, his reptilian features twisting in annoyance. "You do not give orders to reptans. We lead. You follow." Maya looked up at the 7-foot-tall, armored warrior with the expression someone might use when explaining basic mathematics to a child. "Brak, with all due respect, your species' tactical doctrine was developed for open battlefield warfare against enemies who fight with honor and predictable patterns. This is urban guerrilla simulation against adaptive AI opponents." "Your point," Sven hissed. "My point is that if you charge in there, like your ancestors did at the Battle of Corvex Prime, you're going to get shredded by crossfire within 30 seconds. But if you're willing to trust me for exactly 1 hour, I can get us all through this with a perfect score." The two reptans exchanged glances. In their culture, backing down from a challenge was roughly equivalent to admitting your eggs were infertile. "Fine," Brak snarled, "but when this fails, human, the shame is yours alone. Deal." Up in the observation deck, Vorthak nearly choked on his coffee. Did that human just convince 2 reptans to follow her tactical plan? "Impossible," muttered Professor Yilnex. "Reptans don't take orders from anyone ranked below them, especially not from species they consider inferior." What followed was 43 minutes of the most unconventional tactical display any of the instructors had ever witnessed. Instead of the expected frontal assault, Maya had her team split into 3 groups. The reptans, as promised, created their distraction, but not at the main entrance. Instead, they positioned themselves at what appeared to be a secondary objective, making enough noise to wake the dead while firing at everything that moved. Meanwhile, Maya, Unit 445, and Halo approached the actual target from an entirely different direction. But they didn't approach directly either. Instead, Maya had them circle around to a position that, according to every tactical manual in the galaxy, was completely worthless. What is she doing? Drill Sergeant Grom scratched his massive head with a claw. That position has no tactical value whatsoever. "Wait," said Major Strex, leaning forward. "She's not trying to secure the plaza. The automated defense systems, having detected the reptans' assault on the secondary position, had reoriented their primary firepower to counter the obvious threat, which left the central plaza defended by exactly 2 automated sentries and a handful of mobile units. Maya and her micro-team didn't attack the plaza. Instead, they infiltrated the building that housed the simulation's central control node. "That's cheating," Professor Yilnex protested. "The objective is to secure the plaza, not hack the control systems." "Actually," Vorthak said slowly, his tentacles curling as he reread the mission parameters, The objective is to secure the central plaza and hold it for 30 minutes. It doesn't specify how. On screen, Maya was doing something with a handheld device, while Unit 445 stood guard, and Halo used her energy manipulation to keep the building's internal sensors confused. Whatever the human was doing, it was taking longer than expected. "Come on," she muttered, fingers flying over her device's interface. "Just need to convince you that your own forces are the enemy." The next few minutes were absolute chaos. Every automated defense system in the simulation simultaneously decided that every other automated defense system was a hostile target. The plaza erupted in friendly fire as drones shot down other drones. Turrets swiveled to engage nearby turrets, and the central defensive AI had what could only be described as a complete nervous breakdown. "Now!" Maya shouted into her communicator. "Brack, Sven, move to the plaza now! It's completely clear." The two Reptans, who had been pinned down by heavy fire just moments before, found themselves suddenly able to advance without any resistance whatsoever. They reached the central plaza in less than 3 minutes and set up defensive positions, just as Maya had instructed. 30 minutes of holding time starts now," Maya announced cheerfully, as she, Unit 445, and Halo emerged from the control building to join their teammates. Up in the observation deck, the silence was so complete you could have heard a Glibbian flower petal drop. "Did she just," Major Strex began, "hack the simulation and turn the entire defensive network against itself?" Vorthak finished. Yes, she did. Is that even legal?" "According to the rules, any method that achieves the objective without causing harm to team members is acceptable." Vorthak's tentacles were now curling and uncurling in rapid succession, which those who knew him recognized as a sign of deep thought. She read the mission parameters, identified the actual win condition, and found the most efficient path to success. "But that's not how military tactics work," protested Professor Yilnex. "Isn't it?" Vorthak turned to look at his colleague. "Tell me, Professor, what's the primary goal of any military engagement?" "To defeat the enemy, obviously." "Wrong. The primary goal is to achieve your strategic objective. Defeating the enemy is merely one possible method." Vorthak turned back to the screen, where Team 7 was casually chatting while maintaining their defensive positions. The human understood this. The rest of us, apparently, did not. The remaining 27 minutes of the simulation passed without incident. No automated systems remained functional to mount any kind of counterattack, and Team 7 achieved a perfect mission completion score. When the teams were debriefed afterward, the other cadets looked at Maya Torres with a mixture of suspicion and reluctant admiration. The Reptans, in particular, seemed to be having some kind of internal species crisis. "How did you know the control building would have that vulnerability?" asked Cadet Zrik, a Zathari from Team 3. Maya shrugged. "I didn't. But I figured any simulation complex enough to run adaptive AI opponents would need a central coordination system, and any coordination system complex enough to manage multiple autonomous units would have potential cascade failure points. It was worth checking. You based your entire tactical plan on something you weren't sure would work?" This from Cadet Rex, one of the few other humans in the academy. "Of course not. That was Plan A. If the control hack hadn't worked, I had Plans B through F ready to go." Maya smiled that peculiar human smile that somehow managed to be both innocent and terrifying at the same time. Plan B involved convincing the simulation that we were actually the authorized maintenance crew. Plan C required a bit more explosives. "Explosives weren't part of the equipment loadout," pointed out Drill Sergeant Grom. "Not standard explosives, no. But if you know how to recalibrate a Zethari energy cell and combine it with certain components from a Reptan armor power pack, Maya's smile widened. Well, let's just say there are always options if you're creative enough. That evening, Vorthak found himself in the Academy's faculty lounge, staring at Maya Torres's file while nursing his third cup of Vrelian coffee. Her academic scores were indeed impressive, but what caught his attention were the personal notes from her previous instructors. Unconventional problem-solving approach, read one comment from her pre-academy training, tends to find solutions that technically meet requirements while completely subverting intended methodology. Another note was even more telling. Cadet Torres appears to view every rule as a puzzle to be solved rather than a constraint to be followed. Recommend advanced placement or alternative training track? Fascinating, Vorthak murmured to himself. Sir? Lieutenant Crox had entered the lounge and was now standing nearby with a data pad. The after-action reports from today's simulation are ready for your review. Let me guess. Team 7 received perfect scores. Actually, sir, they received better than perfect scores. The evaluation algorithm had to create a new category for their performance. Vorthak's tentacles curled in what was definitely amusement now. And the other teams? Standard results across the board. Team 3 performed slightly above average. Teams 1 and 5 met expected parameters, and Teams 2 and 4 will need additional training before advancement. Interesting. Schedule another simulation for next week. Urban environment again, but increase the difficulty level. How much of an increase, sir? Vorthak was quiet for a long moment, studying Maya Torres's photograph in her file. Young, determined, and apparently blessed with the kind of creative intelligence that military academies spent years trying to either nurture or eliminate. Double it, he said finally. If Cadet Torres is as clever as she appears to be, let's see how she handles a real challenge. Sir, doubling the difficulty on a second-week simulation is highly irregular. The other cadets may not be prepared for that level of intensity. Then they'd better learn quickly. Vorthak closed the file and stood up. Or they'd better hope their human teammate has a few more tricks up her sleeve. As he walked back toward his quarters, Vorthak found himself genuinely curious for the first time in years. Human military doctrine had always struck him as chaotic and unpredictable, but perhaps that was the point. In a galaxy where every species had developed rigid tactical systems based on their biological and cultural strengths, maybe what the Alliance needed was someone who thought completely outside those established frameworks. Of course, there was always the possibility that Maya Torres was simply lucky. One successful simulation didn't prove anything beyond creative problem-solving under pressure, but Vorthak had a feeling that luck had very little to do with what he'd witnessed today. The next week's simulation would prove him right. Maya Torres was about to show the entire Galactic Military Academy that humans didn't just think outside the box. They redesigned the box, sold it for scrap, and built something entirely different with the proceeds. The second simulation arrived with all the subtlety of a Thrakari warhammer to the skull. Commander Vorthak had indeed doubled the difficulty, but what he hadn't mentioned to anyone, including Lieutenant Crox, was that he'd also invited several high-ranking officials from Alliance Command to observe. Admiral Thessarian, Supreme Commander of the Third Fleet, sat in the observation deck with her scaled arms folded across her chest. Beside her, General Mox of the Havari Collective buzzed softly, while his compound eyes tracked multiple data streams simultaneously. The third observer was perhaps the most intimidating of all. War Master Krell of the Reptan Empire, whose mere presence made the room's temperature drop several degrees. So this is the human everyone's talking about. Admiral Thessarian's voice carried the kind of authority that made entire star systems pay attention. She looks rather ordinary. That's what makes it interesting, Vorthak replied, trying to keep his tentacles from betraying his nervousness. Humans have this peculiar ability to appear completely harmless right up until the moment they're not. Down in the staging area, Maya Torres was having what appeared to be a perfectly normal conversation with her team. Team 7 had been kept together for continuity, though the other cadets now looked at their human teammate with considerably more respect than they had a week ago. The parameters are different this time, Maya was saying, studying her tactical display. Multiple hostile factions, civilian populations to protect, and a time limit that's been cut in half. Sounds impossible, grumbled Brack, though his tone lacked the dismissive edge it had carried before. Impossible is just another word for nobody's figured it out yet, Maya replied cheerfully. Besides, they wouldn't give us a scenario that was actually impossible. They want to see how we handle extreme pressure, not watch us fail automatically. Unit 445 emitted a series of chemical signals that the team's translator interpreted as cautious optimism mixed with traces of what might generously be called excitement. The Hivari agrees, Halo chimed in, her harmonic frequencies indicating amusement, though it also suggests that your definition of possible might be somewhat broader than most species would consider reasonable. Maya grinned. Where's the fun in being reasonable? The simulation environment this time was a massive metropolitan area under siege by 3 different enemy factions. The Crimson Legion held the industrial district and were slowly advancing with heavy mechanized units. The Shadow Collective had infiltrated the residential areas and were using civilians as human shields. Meanwhile, the Peak Void Runners controlled the spaceport and were threatening to destroy it, along with several thousand refugees, unless their demands were met. Team 7's mission: neutralize all 3 threats, secure the civilian population, and maintain control of the city's central command hub. Time limit: 90 minutes. This is insane, whispered Cadet Rex from Team 5. There's no way anyone can handle 3 separate military operations simultaneously. Maybe that's the point, suggested Cadet Zrick. Perhaps they want to see how we prioritize when faced with impossible choices. Maya Torres, meanwhile, was doing something that made the observing officers lean forward in their seats. She was laughing, not the nervous laughter of someone cracking under pressure, but the genuine amusement of someone who had just been presented with a particularly entertaining puzzle. Maya, Sven hissed, this is not amusing. We are facing certain defeat. No, we're facing certain victory, Maya replied, her fingers dancing across her tactical interface. They made one critical mistake when they designed this scenario. Which is? They assumed we'd play by conventional military rules. Maya's smile took on that peculiar quality that had become known throughout the academy as the Torres expression. Equal parts innocence and impending mayhem. But here's the thing about humans. We're really, really good at changing the rules. In the observation deck, War Master Krell leaned forward. What is she doing? I have no idea, Vorthak admitted, but based on last week's performance, I'd recommend we pay very close attention. The simulation began. Standard tactical doctrine would have required Team 7 to prioritize the threats based on immediate danger to civilian populations. The Shadow Collective's use of human shields made them the obvious first target, followed by the Crimson Legion's advancing mechanized forces, with the Void Runner's spaceport situation dealt with last. Maya Torres had apparently studied different tactical manuals than everyone else. Halo, I need you to generate the biggest, brightest energy display you can manage, Maya said calmly as the team materialized at the city's edge. Make it visible from orbit, if possible. That will drain my energy reserves completely, Halo protested. I'll be useless for the rest of the simulation. Trust me. Meanwhile, Maya was pulling components from everyone's equipment packs and assembling them into something that looked like a cross between a communications array and a small explosive device. Brack, Sven, I need you to get to the industrial district as fast as possible. But don't engage the Crimson Legion directly. Then what do we do? Brack demanded. You're going to surrender to them. The silence that followed this announcement was so complete that even Unit 445 stopped emitting chemical signals. I beg your pardon? Sven's voice carried the kind of deadly calm that preceded Repton dueling challenges. You're going to walk right up to their command position, throw down your weapons, and surrender unconditionally. Maya's fingers were still working on her improvised device. Make sure they capture you alive and bring you to their central command post. Human, Brack said very slowly, if you think we will allow ourselves to be taken prisoner for your amusement. I think you'll allow yourselves to be taken prisoner because in exactly 47 minutes, you're going to break out and disable their entire mechanized division from the inside. Maya looked up from her work. Unless you'd prefer to assault a fortified position defended by heavy artillery with nothing but small arms and harsh language? The two Reptans exchanged glances. When put that way, the surrender plan almost sounded reasonable. Almost. And what exactly will you be doing while we're enjoying enemy hospitality? Sven inquired. Unit 445. And I are going to solve the civilian hostage situation by convincing the Shadow Collective that they're under attack by the Crimson Legion. Maya held up her improvised device. This little beauty is going to broadcast false radio chatter that makes it sound like the Legion is preparing to eliminate all witnesses to their war crimes. And the spaceport? Maya's grin widened. That's where Halo's light show comes in. We're going to convince the Void Runners that the Alliance First Fleet just dropped out of hyperspace and is preparing to glass the entire planet unless they surrender immediately. Up in the observation deck, General Mox's buzzing reached a frequency that roughly translated to, "What in the name of the Queen's sacred antennae is happening down there?" Admiral Thessarian was studying the tactical display with the expression of someone trying to solve a particularly complex mathematical equation. She's not fighting three separate battles. She's manipulating all three factions into fighting each other. Impossible, War Master Krell rumbled. The enemy AI systems are too sophisticated to fall for simple deception. Are they? Vorthak's tentacles were curling rapidly. Or are they sophisticated in predictable ways that someone with sufficient understanding of their programming could exploit? What happened next would later be analyzed by military strategists across 17 different star systems. Halo's energy display lit up the sky like a miniature sun, visible from every point in the city. Maya's broadcasting device began transmitting on multiple frequencies simultaneously, filling the airwaves with carefully crafted false communications that painted a picture of massive military reinforcements arriving in-system. Meanwhile, Brack and Sven approached the Crimson Legion's forward positions with their weapons conspicuously lowered. "We surrender!" Brack shouted in his best imitation of a defeated warrior. "Our human leader has abandoned us! We seek mercy!" The Legion's response was exactly what Maya had predicted. Rather than simply eliminating the two Reptans, they saw an opportunity for valuable intelligence about Alliance tactics. Brack and Sven found themselves transported directly to the Legion's mobile command center. 20 minutes into the simulation, Maya's psychological warfare campaign began producing results. The Shadow Collective, having intercepted the false radio chatter about Legion war crimes, began repositioning their forces to defend against an attack that wasn't coming. This movement exposed their positions and allowed Maya and Unit 445 to approach the civilian holding areas without significant resistance. The Void Runners, meanwhile, were scanning the skies, frantically trying to locate the Alliance fleet that their sensors insisted was somewhere in orbit. Their defensive posture shifted from offensive to purely reactive, buying precious time for refugee evacuation. "She's not just fighting the simulation," Admiral Thessarian observed. "She's reprogramming it in real time." "How is this possible?" General Mox demanded. "The AI systems are designed to be immune to this kind of manipulation." "They're immune to conventional manipulation," Vorthak replied, "but Maya Torres doesn't seem to use conventional methods for anything." The climax came 45 minutes into the simulation. Brack and Sven, having been interrogated for exactly long enough to establish their cover story, suddenly revealed that their surrender had been a ruse. But instead of engaging in direct combat with their captors, they did something far more devastating. They activated the Crimson Legion's own emergency protocols. "How did you access our command systems?" the Legion's AI commander demanded, as alarms began blaring throughout their positions. "We didn't," Brack replied cheerfully. "We just convinced your security protocols that you'd been infiltrated by Shadow Collective operatives." Every Crimson Legion unit suddenly found itself flagged as a potential enemy infiltrator by their own command system. Weapons locked down, communications went silent, and their mechanized advance ground to a complete halt as the AI spent crucial minutes trying to verify the identity of its own forces. Meanwhile, Maya had managed to convince the Shadow Collective that the Legion was indeed preparing to eliminate all witnesses. Their response was swift and predictable. They released the civilian hostages and repositioned all their forces to counter the Legion threat. This left Maya and Unit 445 free to approach the civilian population with a simple message: Alliance reinforcements have arrived. Proceed to designated evacuation zones immediately. The refugees, seeing Halo's brilliant energy display in the sky and hearing the sounds of battle from multiple directions, needed no further encouragement. The final piece of Maya's plan activated with surgical precision. The Void Runners, convinced that an Alliance fleet was about to reduce their position to radioactive dust, made the logical military decision. They attempted to negotiate a surrender with the orbital forces that didn't actually exist. Maya, monitoring all communications from the Central Command Hub, was happy to accept their surrender on behalf of Admiral Torres of the First Fleet. "Wait," said Unit 445, its chemical emissions indicating confusion. "You promoted yourself to Admiral?" "Field promotions happen all the time during combat operations," Maya replied with a perfectly straight face. "I'm sure the paperwork will sort itself out later." When the simulation ended, the results display had to be recalibrated twice before anyone believed the numbers. Mission objectives achieved: 100% civilian casualties, 0 friendly casualties, 0 enemy forces neutralized, 100% time to completion, 73 minutes collateral damage, minimal. But the most impressive statistic was one that didn't appear on any official report. Total rounds fired by Team 7 during the entire simulation was exactly 0. The debriefing session was unlike anything in Academy history. "Cadet Torres," Admiral Thessarian began, her voice carefully neutral. "Your tactical approach was unconventional." "Thank you, Admiral." "That wasn't necessarily a compliment." "I know, Admiral." War Master Krell leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the debriefing table. "You achieved victory through deception and manipulation rather than honorable combat." "Yes, sir. I achieved victory. You don't deny that your methods were dishonorable?" Maya Torres looked directly at the War Master with those unsettling human eyes. "Sir, with respect, I don't consider saving lives to be dishonorable. Every civilian we evacuated safely, every enemy soldier who surrendered instead of dying pointlessly, every building that didn't get reduced to rubble, that's not dishonorable. That's the point. The point of military training is to prepare warriors for battle," General Mox buzzed. "No, sir. The point of military training is to prepare leaders for victory." Maya's voice remained perfectly respectful, but there was steel underneath the politeness. Battle is just one tool among many. Sometimes it's the right tool. Sometimes it's not. And who decides when it's appropriate to use alternative methods? This from Admiral Thessarian. "The person responsible for the consequences, Admiral. In this case, that was me." The room fell silent. In the back, Commander Vorthak felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Genuine excitement about the future of warfare. "Cadet Torres," Admiral Thessarian said finally, "you'll be receiving special advanced placement. Your tactical innovations will be studied by strategists across the Alliance." "Thank you, Admiral. But I should point out that what I did wasn't actually innovative." "Explain." Maya smiled that dangerous human smile. "Admiral, everything I did in that simulation was based on historical, human military doctrine. The only thing that was innovative was applying it to a galactic context." War Master Krell's eyes narrowed. "You mean to tell me that your species has been developing these tactics for how long?" "Several thousand years, sir. We've gotten pretty good at it." As the official debriefing concluded and the officers filed out, Commander Vorthak lingered behind. "Cadet Torres, a word?" "Yes, sir." "That business about human military doctrine, you weren't exaggerating, were you?" Maya Torres looked at him with an expression that was somehow both innocent and terrifying. "Commander, humans spent most of our history fighting each other. We got really good at finding creative solutions to military problems. And now you're sharing those solutions with the galaxy." "Now we're sharing those solutions with our allies," Maya corrected gently. "There's a difference." As she walked away, Vorthak realized that the Galactic Alliance had just gained something far more valuable than another capable officer. They'd gained access to the accumulated military wisdom of a species that had spent millennia perfecting the art of warfare against opponents who thought exactly like them. 6 months later, Maya Torres graduated first in her class. Her final thesis, titled Asymmetric Warfare in Multi-Species Combat Environments, became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. 3 years after that, Colonel Maya Torres led the Alliance forces that ended the Hegemony War in a single engagement without firing a shot. But that, as humans say, is another story entirely. The cadets who graduated with Maya Torres would later become the first generation of Alliance officers trained in what came to be known as human-style tactical doctrine. They carried her lessons to every corner of the galaxy, teaching new generations of warriors that sometimes the most effective weapon was the one you never had to use. And in the observation decks of military academies throughout the Alliance, instructors would tell new students about the human cadet who changed everything. "They said she was just a human," the stories always began. "They were wrong. She was a human." And that made all the difference.